celebrate today and tomorrow in Philippines as Undas, which is a day that we actually go to the graves of our loved ones and spend a day or two there with them, share stories with one another, share food, eat together, and also just think and pray for our loved ones who passed away. Today, here at the exhibit, uh, Golden Years, curated by Victor Barnuevo Velasco, who just gave the exhibit tour, guided exhibit tour, for those who just walked in, uh, has been collecting this for how many years? 20. Over 20 years. And it's gone to over 20 cities? 14. 14 this is the 15th 15th venue. And so you're part of history now by joining us today. This is our last event of Filipino American History Month. So we just cherish that you're here with us today. Um, we will start a panel now. And I just want to introduce our speakers. You've already met Victor. He reads a lot, writes a little, and occasionally curates art exhibits. His poetry and fiction have been featured in print and online journals, magazines, anthologies, including Annie, which is a Philippine graphic, uh, uh, which is a Philippine graphic, San Telmo, Migozine, Impossible Archetype, Soft Blow, Molly House, and TLDTD. He is a founding trustee of the Albay Arts Foundation, which is building an art campus in San Domingo, Albay. What part of the Philippines? Like North, Central Philippines?
About Southern Luzon.
Southern Luzon.
Central.
We also have Father Ben Alforque, who may be joining us a little bit later. He's a Catholic priest who belongs to the religious congregation of the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart. He was a political detainee from October 5, 1973 to May 18, 1974, and co-chaired the promotion of Church People's Rights Response and the Justice and Peace Commission with the Association of Major Religious Superiors of Philippines. He was ambushed by a composite team of military and police in Quezon City and was missing for 6 hours on April 25, 1989. Convener Rise Up for Life and Rights, and first president of National Alliance for Filipino Concerns in the U.S., which is NAFCON for short. He's also first president, National Alliance for Filipino Concerns. He's also the chairman of the board, National Ecumenical Forum for Filipino Concerns in the Inland Empire, NEFFCON, and the pastor of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. Carol is also joining us. She was a student of the University of Philippines in Diliman when martial law was declared in 1972. She dropped out of school to become a full-time community organizer against a military dictatorship. In 1975, Carol moved to the U.S. with her 6-month-old son, a decision she made to ensure her son's safety. She continued her activism work in the U.S. and joined other Filipino Americans in supporting the anti-dictatorship movement in the Philippines. After the historic People's Power in 1986, Carol continued her education and graduated with a bachelor's degree in 1987 and received her MA in urban planning in environmental analysis from UCLA in 1986. Carol's been involved in community advocacy as a member of the LA County Commission on Public Social Services, land use policies as a planning commissioner of the city of San Gabriel, and as a member of the board of directors for the nonprofit group Search to Involve Filipino Americans. I don't know if anyone here has visited LA. That's a youth nonprofit organization that has been around for a long time and has hosted guests like Ruby Ibarra and other hip hop artists. Myrla Baldonado is a former coworker of mine from Filipino Worker Center. She is currently the director of the Community Empowerment Department of the Filipino Worker Center in Los Angeles, organizing domestic workers and seafarers. There was an issue here with Filipino seafarers, I think off of Houston. For more than 10 years, Myrla has organized domestic workers in both Illinois and California. She coordinated the international campaign for basics cleanup in the Philippines to get the U.S. responsibility of the environmental mess. She organized base workers, students, and other marginalized forces in the area of Subic Naval Base, where she was arrested, disappeared, waterboarded, and detained in 1983 during the Marcos dictatorship. So for now, we will start with Victor. Uh, can you share some of the reasons why you started the photo exhibit? Why did you start collecting all these photos over 20 years?
Well, as an immigrant, as a Filipino immigrant, I was very happy to realize that there were a lot of artifacts about the Philippines here in the U.S. And not only about these photographs, but other types of photographs, but also artifacts, artworks that were brought over here by American. As you know, the Philippines was an American colony from the late 1890s to around mid 1940s. And so a lot of American GIs, tourists, expats brought back a lot of artifacts here in the US after their stay there. And those include artworks by young artists who eventually got big names. And I started collecting them and realized that some of those artifacts included photographs from US newspapers, not just about the martial law, but also about ethnographics, culture, events in the Philippines. So we've been collecting them, and my goal with my husband's support is to bring all them back to the Philippines in the art museum that we are building and art campus that we are building in Albayan, Bicol, right next to the same place as Mayon Volcano. So then when Marcos Jr. Became elected as president of the Philippines in 2022, I realized that there is a need to tell the story of what really happened in the Philippines during the first Marcos years, 1965 to 1986. As I've mentioned earlier in the guided tour, the Marcos years won the election in part because of the rebranding of what happened during these years as the golden years or the golden era of Philippine economy and society. They have been campaigning and telling people that during their time there was economic boom, there was peace and order, everybody was happy in the Philippines. And a lot of those folks, a lot of the younger folks who don't know any better, don't have the real information. And so I realized that, and at the biggest supporters of the Marcoses in the Philippines were really diasporic Filipinos, Filipinos here in the US. They overwhelmingly won the election here. And that's when I realized that there's a need to tell what really happened during the Marcos years and what better way to tell them, aside from those people who survived and who lived through the years, are all these photographs that were taken and published in US newspapers.
Thank you, Victor. If you haven't had a chance to sign in, please remember to sign in on the sheet over there, and you can also get your food on your way back to your seat. And there's also water. Carol, can you still hear me? Carol?
Yes.
We did read your bio, so they know a little bit of your background. So some of us here in the audience know a little bit now about what happened in martial law, especially in the earlier years, because of Victor's guided tour. When did you know that the Marcos Sr. regime was really serious about silencing opposition? What is a story that you'd like to share with us today?
Hi, good afternoon. When did I know he was serious? Actually, even before martial law was declared, in 1971, he did a test case. Marcos the writ of habeas corpus. And if that sounds familiar to everyone here today, with immigrants being taken and detained and deported without due process, that's what Marcos did. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus, which determined whether that detention is lawful or not. So Marcos did that in 1971 before he officially declared martial law. And I was a senior in high school when that happened. And what I did is joined discussion groups. I participated in discussion groups and attended rallies to protest this action because we considered it to be a precursor to martial law. Marcos was testing the waters, and a year later, I was a freshman at UP. He declared martial law, and school closed for 3 months. Why? Because he had to prepare the school to prevent any kind of opposition, environment of academic freedom to a virtual prison. The whole campus and the buildings were surrounded by barbed wire fences with military personnel posted and stationed at all entrances, entrance to the campus, entrance to every building. The declaration of martial law created an atmosphere of repression. He signed executive orders left and right, effectively outlawing any kind of opposition to his regime. Again, I ask you, is this sounding familiar today? In place of a democratic government, he created what he called the new society, kind of like a bigger, better society or the big, beautiful bill. So all of his executive orders and everything about his new government carried the motto, sa ikauunlad ng bayan, disiplina ang kailangan. For the country to prosper, we need discipline is necessary. So, this is very much, I'm watching what's going on in our country, the US, today, and it's very eerily familiar because of what we went through in the Philippines in the 70s. But it hasn't gone to the extreme. So I'd like for you to imagine the following scenarios which happened in the Philippines as these could eventually possibly happen here. Labor strikes and demonstrations were banned. Thousands were arrested and imprisoned without due process. That's starting to happen. He abolished or closed Congress. At least we still have the House and the Senate, even though it's heavily stacked by Republicans. In the judicial branch, the judges were forced to sign letters of resignation. The media was effectively silenced. And everywhere in the broadcast media, they would play the song praising the new society. And most egregious is the presence of the military everywhere, including shopping malls or big grocery stores, were similar to our universities and colleges. Anyone could be subject to having your purse or bags searched before you're allowed entrance. So Marcos ruled through executive orders and through a series of rigged elections, further consolidating and giving legitimacy to his dictatorship. And even members of the ruling elite were arrested. So no one was exempt, even if you had previous power or if you had monetary power, they were not exempt from being arrested. And later on, Amnesty International would find widespread abuses of human rights, including the systematic torture of political prisoners. So in such a climate, we who opposed Marcos operated from the underground. And that's as serious as it gets. So if you're seeing some similarities, I just hope it doesn't get to that extreme as what we experienced in the 70s.
Thank you, Carol. speaking of schools being used for prisons, there's maybe a few of us here who know about how schools, as they're structured, if you really take a look at our schools, whether they're elementary schools or high schools or colleges, they are sort of already structured to be able to be turned into a prison. I haven't done research and look at the details myself on that, but I think that the contractors are similar in terms of how they structure the schools that way, similar to what you were sharing earlier. Myrla, I understand that you were a political prisoner. What are some of the things that you still think about today, and how does it impact you?
I was arrested when I was directly working underground in the Subic Naval Base area to end the stay of the military. I was part of a team that organized base workers, students, and urban dwellers. We work in a very small city that was easy to monitor, but we took all the risks so we could educate, organize, and mobilize the people. Every day we did organizing work, penetrating the union, creating cells of workers, and developing leaders in the pro-American Union. I was disappeared for 2 weeks. I was waterboarded and kept in what they call a safe house to be picked up every other day for waterboarding. That is, so I would tell them the names of the people who are working, especially the ones who are working inside the base. I was blindfolded, brought to a farm for waterboarding. During these times, I learned about the US control over information and knowledge of my whereabouts. I was waterboarded in a way that was part of a training. In the middle of my stay in detention, the US intelligence wanted to pay me to spy on two political detainees in exchange for raising pigs. They said they knew about my arrest right from the start. As a captured woman, I did go through sexual harassment during torture. It was a way to frighten us, to make us feel low and come out with names so they would destroy the movement. I survived the stigma by thinking that they are the ones, my perpetrators were the ones who should be ashamed of what they did. But to many like me, especially those who were raped and had a hard time dealing with the trauma, it has been very difficult. Had I been raped myself or passed on to be raped by many, I don't know if I'd be able to recover and be able to speak to you now. I spent almost 2 years in detention in a cramped space with common crime violators. I fretted for a long time getting a judgment of being incarcerated for life in Muntinlupa. I learned the hard lesson that jail was meant to destroy your resolve to change society. Though 2 years seemed short, they were the longest days in my life of pain and sorrow, especially when my mother came to visit me from abroad. I won my case and was freed, but I had to be rehabilitated for 5 years in Chicago, 20 years after it happened. Just recently, I got sick and got so sad that I thought I was getting depressed. So the trauma keeps coming back. It never goes away.
Thank you for sharing, Tita Myrla. I know that it's very hard to understand. Some of us here, like life seems so normal. We go to our jobs every day. We still have parties. When there's times for parties, we go to the movies. Things seem normal, and it's a little bit hard to think about, like, what if those people that were sent to Alligator Alcatraz? some of the prisons in El Salvador and how the news stopped talking about them. The news stopped talking about what they did. And the thing that most people just think about now is, well, they must have done something wrong. They must have been illegal. They must have done something to warrant it. And we're sitting here hearing your stories, very horrific stories, that we would associate with something that, you know, they were in a bad situation, you know, in normal life. But over there during martial law, that was common. That was widespread. And so what would you like to share about the sort of dissonance that we're living in right now, where life seems so normal? We still go to Sunday in our, you know, church in our Sunday dresses. But what about all those people that were imprisoned, that were just taken away from their home the moment they stepped out of their house because someone decided that they were terrorists? Like Yakub Ira, who is an activist and has been outspoken about Palestine, and he is a Muslim. He was detained and he was here legally. He was a recipient of DACA. And he shouldn't have been deported. There's a lot of people that shouldn't have been deported. And what is the response that we hear often is, well, they should have become citizens a long time ago. They should have done this or should have done that. But the thing is, you can't just move the goalpost. If they were told that they're here legally, and if they were told to go to court and show up and, you know, to follow due process, you can't. They can't just be arrested for doing that. So, what words would you have? You know, would you like to share about this dissonance that we're living and breathing in daily, when we don't even talk about the people that were taken and are being abused in prison right now in detention, especially, you know, from the perspective of having to go underground, and anything that you'd like to share about how you feel, what you had to do to survive.
Okay, I'm on mute now. Um, I don't see it as a, well, maybe as a Filipino American who goes back and forth. There is a dissonance, but I don't also want to put too much emphasis on that because it's two very different situations. And we can't expect people to feel what people in the Philippines feel, and vice versa. Um, but we can imagine what it was like or what it is like, so that we can do something to prevent it from happening here, which is what's going on today. And I know we're gonna talk about how we worked today to prevent something like what happened in the Philippines, prevent it from happening here. So I just didn't want to go too deep into this, the dissonance, because they're two very different objective realities. Otherwise, I just have this feeling that, I've gone through all these guilt for many years, and I'm still working through the guilt. And one of the ways that I'm facing this or fighting this guilt is to admit that it's not my fault that I'm here, and that I have a better life. That's relative, really. What is a better life, and so on. So I think that's the main thing I want to say about the difference between the two political situations.
Thank you, Carol. Tita Myrla, do you have anything to share?
Yeah. So I just wanted to share what we did to survive during those times. we went underground, most of us. I did. That would mean every day you have to transfer houses, undertake a different personality or character. We might be planted as a family in a community where we would stay so we can meet as a unit, plan our organizing. We had to study politics well to be able to articulate them so we would be able to convince people to broaden the ranks of those who are fighting and supporting the movement. We would be living with people who knew that we were in the underground movement and supported us. We would be fundraising, and our families carried a lot of the burden of supporting us also. But largely, the people who organized us were the ones who fed and protected us. They were the workers or the peasants in the fields where we were assigned. We had to survive and avoid arrest and prepare ourselves for the worst. So we were a fighting unit, and I remember how people power came later, and how the movement, started, and how it persisted to to organize to organize the people against the Marcos dictatorship. So it was a movement against Marcos, not only Marcos, but the foreign power and the landed elite. It was a national democratic struggle that I joined. Yeah, and there was so much hardship, but looking back, we have no regrets for we have we were eventually able to bring the people to fight Marcos, and that's a legacy that we all look back to, despite all the challenges and the pain and the loss that we had.
Carol, what was it like to, I don't know if you want to share more about your husband's story and what that was like with the disappearing, and it's a little different because we don't know of a lot of journalists who have been kidnapped yet here. It's mostly focused on immigrants. But some of these immigrants actually, without the immigrant title, they're known to have some type of history in disagreement with the government official decisions about certain nations like Palestine. So even though they're quote unquote being taken away because of their immigration status, in a sort of way they are being taken away because of their disagreement with the government. So Carol or Tita Myrla, if you have anything to address regarding that, please do.
Okay. As I said, that it became, very repressive climate in the Philippines. So anyone who opposed Marcos, and I was a student at the time, like Myrla, we had to operate from the underground. We couldn't openly protest. We had to be very creative about it. And many of us left the comforts of our homes to become full-time community organizers. Our political work, well, for me and my classmates that joined me to become full-time community organizers, our work involved working with the squatters. That's a pejorative term which describes the large number of urban poor who were forced into illegally building shelters on private or public-owned land. So squatters lived under constant threat of eviction. So we would organize them on how to fight evictions, etc. And in these communities, that's where I met Rolando Federes. He was also a student and a tailor who actually lived in one of these shanties. And Lando came from a poor family. In fact, he was the first to go to college, where he quickly became politically involved. I fell in love with Lando. He was this tall, lean with nice wavy dark hair, and he turns out apparently felt the same with me. We became a couple, and I moved in with him and lived in one of the squatters areas where we were organizing. In a few months, Lando and I would soon learn we were expecting a child. And as I got close to my giving birth, I chose to scale back on my activities because it was becoming very difficult to outrun the military with a bulging belly. So I went back home and had my son in 1974. And then the military started visiting my parents' home to question me. And they would try to intimidate me by saying they have pictures of me at this place and that. And they would ask what I was doing there. They would keep reminding me to cooperate with them and tell them what they needed, and they would leave me alone. This caused fear and worries to my parents. My mother had already immigrated to the US, and my father and siblings were getting ready to do the same, but they stayed with me until I had the baby. Meanwhile, again, the situation, the political situation even became more repressive. People were resigned to midnight curfew. Military presence was really everywhere. There was a general loss of civil and democratic rights. And faced with the threat of arrest and possibility of my son becoming an orphan, I made a decision to leave the Philippines and temporarily move to the US with a plan to return when things cooled off. So in 1975, we moved and boarded the plane, moved to LA to join my family. I maintained communication with Lando, with my husband, through an intermediary for security reasons. I would send pictures of our son, and he was very proud. He showed off those pictures. I dreamt of reuniting with him until I stopped getting letters around October of 1976. And then in January of 1977, I received a letter. It said, Kasama, we don't want to alarm you. Kasama is comrade. We don't want to alarm you, and we don't know anything for sure. But Lando boarded a train for Bicol last October, and we saw him off at the Tutuban station. The train arrived in Bicol, but Lando and the two women who were traveling with him were not on board. We are working with the clergy. Don't worry. The letter was dated January 1977, 3 months after Lando disappeared. There were many speculations about what may have occurred, but my kasamas chose to spare me the details until they had more definitive findings. I waited and waited until eventually a letter arrived which confirmed what I secretly feared but would not let myself think. Lando and one of the women, Flora Coronacion, would become victims to a practice that would later be known as salvaging, which means it's a disappearance and subsequent summary execution of suspected subversives. Today, it's called, more commonly known as extrajudicial killing. The other woman who was with them at the time of the disappearance, Adora Faye de Vera, was my former classmate at UP, and she was the only survivor. In 1986, after Marcos was deposed, I was able to return to the Philippines and arranged to meet with Adora Faye. I found her after a month of searching, and she recounted their ordeal, describing how they were arrested and taken to a safe house, also a safe house somewhere in the province of Quezon. There they were stripped naked, subjected to various forms of torture and indignities, including sexual molestation and rape of the women by the soldiers. They were made to sit on large blocks of ice without any clothes on. The women were ordered to look at Lando's naked body, with the military men laughing and taunting them to, "Go ahead, take a peek. You can't say we're not being fair." And then they would order Lando to masturbate in front of the women. Adora Faye continued, telling me the story about Flora Coronacion and Lando's fate with their military torturers, saying that after a few weeks, the soldiers took Lando and Flora out of their cell, and when they returned, they didn't return with the two at the end of the day. She looked for her comrades, and the head of the unit told her, "Your friends are not here. They didn't escape, but you will never see them again." In 1986, a class action lawsuit against the Marcos estate was filed in the courtroom of Federal Judge Manuel Real in Hawaii on behalf of survivors and families of victims of torture, disappearances, and extrajudicial killings. Adora Faye was able to go, and it was her compelling testimony before Judge Real that would lead to the final decision for the plaintiffs. And each of the 10,000 plaintiffs in this class action lawsuit were given an initial check of $1,000 in compensation for the loss of our loved ones. When I got that check, I just looked at it. Is this the value of the life of a Filipino? What if this was your child, your parent, your partner? Is this supposed to be okay? So it's and now it's happening again with after Marcos, with the Duterte administration. Even more people more people, including children. Children were killed because they were suspected of being drug addicts or selling drugs with no due process. They would just be killed. And I think the term they called it was tokhang, which is extrajudicial killing. And Duterte is in The Hague right now, facing charges and facing a trial for the extrajudicial killings that happened during his administration. But what it shows is it can happen again.
Yes, and it's very sad that somehow some people that know that Marcos was evil, with the money he stole from the country and all the human rights abuses, for some reason, some people who were against Marcos actually don't find anything wrong with Duterte, and I'm not sure why. Carol, I just want to take a moment to also thank you for sharing that sacred story of your loved one. And I know that we'll remember things like that, as well as the story that Tita Myrla, you shared about what you experienced as a woman. I hope that the audience here today can take these stories with knowing that this is part of the celebration of Undas, and witnessing these stories is a very special and sacred process for me. And I hope everyone shares that sentiment, because especially on the day that we celebrate the memory of our loved ones, you know, these horrific stories are part of it. These stories of trauma are part of it. And I just want to thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for the story, Carol and Myrla. Mine is nothing grave like what they have experienced directly. But what I want to say too is that one of the dangers, or one of the devastating event that happened with what Marcoses did, is their legacy of corruption and institutionalization of those corruption. Because Carol alluded to Duterte and the extrajudicial killing, which is another incarnation of what Marcos did during these years. One thing also that happened after the Marcos years was the politicalization of the military. Military is supposed to be a neutral force, but Marcos carried the favors of generals and politicized those generals and enabled them to be corrupt, that even way after they were ousted and way into their second reign right now with Marcos Jr. as the president, that machinery, that armed machinery has become so highly politicized still. So in fact, one of the presidents after Marcos, Fidel Ramos, was a general under Marcos. So although he rebelled under Marcos in one of the elements for their ouster in 1986, eventually he became a president, and everybody that was under him who were once cronies of Marcos were still in power during that time, and a lot of those are still in power now. So that's what was very frightening of what happened with the Marcos years, was the politicalization of the military.
Yes, and for those who were hearing the word kasama earlier, kasama means brother or sister. As you know, for Filipino language, the pronouns aren't gendered. So siya means he or she, and kasama means brother or sister, mostly in the movement. So kasama is someone that you share community space with or activism space with. And in the context of martial law, kasama means something that where if you know that you both experience it together, I feel like it's it's even more special word, an added meaning to have a kasama during martial law. And for those who are wondering about how many reparations were made, the government only recognized 11,103, and a documentary is based on that number that we hope to share at some point, maybe in November or December.
So that 11,103, of which one of the recipients was Carol, was paid for from the recovered hidden wealth of the Marcoses, although that's only a fraction of what they have accumulated. The estimate wealth that they have built over the last 20 years when they reigned was between $5 to $10 billion, and a lot of them are still unrecovered. And one of the big factor for being able to determine whether you can be reparated or you can be paid by the government was documentation. That 11,103 is only a small percentage of the actual victims. A lot of them were not able to get reparation from the government because they lacked documentation. Because the crimes that happened were in far-flung villages, or there was no witness, or they did not even report the incidents because they were afraid to report it when that happened. As I've mentioned, when I was in college, I was a volunteer of Task Force Detainees of the Philippines, And my job back then was to digitize, was to put in Microsoft Word or WordStar, I don't know if you still remember that, was to type in the WordStar, the typewritten documentation, and also to listen to recorded tapes of those victims, and then transcribe them digitally into Microsoft Word or WordStar, which was the software back then. So as a 17, 18-year-old, I would listen to hours and hours of tape interviews of women who were raped, women whose husband they lost, whose children they lost, whose properties they lost. And also, I would look at photographs of people who were massacred, people who were killed, who were the word back then in the Philippines called salvaged, which basically means, in the real English word is to save something, right, when you're salvaged. But in the Philippine context, to get salvaged is to get killed and your body dumped somewhere. So when somebody says that person was salvaged, that's what happened. And, and that's a scenario that would repeat again in the Duterte administration, when those who were killed just showed up in a street somewhere or dumped somewhere in the street for everybody to see, so that they can be shown as examples or warnings for others. So at any rate, as a volunteer, I would listen to those conversations. I would look at the pictures and would file them digitally. And we would put a press release or a notice that we would send out to Amnesty International. That was college years. And after college, I got to work. I went to the US. I can relate to what Carol has mentioned earlier. And sometimes I would have this pang of guilt that I'm here in the US, I have relatively a good job, and folks that I used to work with are back in the Philippines still struggling. So I still have that guilt from time to time. I can relate to that. But all in all those experiences and those words were forgotten, or so I thought. When in 2022, when Marcos Jr. was elected as a president, I was really depressed for days and days. I said, what happened? Why are we back to where we have that for something that was terrible? Why did people elect back this family that they know was horrible and did nothing but horrible things to the Philippines? And I was depressed for a while, for a long time, for days. And one time, my husband and I were driving. I was driving. He was in the passenger seat. We're going to the gym. And he started asking me, because he noticed that I was disposed to late, like, what really happened during the time? I mean, what did you say? I said, well, I really didn't experience it directly because I was very young. But I experienced it vicariously because I said, and suddenly I remembered that job in college. And suddenly, things that I have forgotten because I was already at that time in the Philippines for 20 plus years, suddenly I heard those voices in the tapes of women crying, of children crying, of men begging. And suddenly I saw in front of me, while I was driving, I saw in front of me the photos that I witnessed. And I just found myself crying tremendously. So I didn't even know that I had PTSD at that point. And he was there, he got alarmed. My husband was alarmed in front of me. We were in a traffic light because I couldn't control myself. Again, the guilt, that whole frustration, the fear of what's gonna happen in the Philippines again came rushing back in. And then I realized that I was crying uncontrollably. He was in the passenger seat. And the car next to us was looking at us with these questioning eyes and with these concerned eyes. And I realized, oh shit, I'm in a car with a black man crying, and this person next to me may be thinking of something else. So I have to force myself to stop because of somebody could, misinterpret what's going on and report something, and could end up very badly for both of us. So that's I think one of the lessons, the dissonance that you were talking about. Although we seem, and Carol seemed, and Myrla may have lived a completely normal life, there's this part of us, there's part of you, there's part of us that's hidden that can be triggered anytime. As I mentioned, this exhibit has been triggering exhibit for some people, and it's very heartbreaking for them. And that's also what's happening right now. One of the dangers of authoritarianism is to make us feel that everything is normal. Everything is normal because it's not happening to us. So a lot of memories that happen during, a lot of people that in the Philippines that you would talk to, and Filipinos that you, in the US that you would talk to, who lived through that martial law years, will say, well, there's really nothing bad that happened during that time, because it did not happen to them. So they think it's normal. And not only they think it's normal, they thought it was desirable because good things happened to them. But that doesn't mean that bad things did not happen to others or did not happen to majority. So that's the thing, the dissonance that Myrla was always talking about. It's just stepping outside of ourselves, stepping outside of our comfort zone, and seeing what's happening in others that may eventually happen to somebody we know, or to us, maybe eventually. Hopefully not.
I just want to give the mic to my own father. I don't know how many of you were able to read the article from Deceleration, but maybe just for 2 or 3 minutes, talk about my father. My father was a professor in Philippines at the time. He was teaching political science, and he was actually watch-listed or blacklisted in Philippines. Can you tell us about what you were doing and how you left the country?
Well, yes, as Myrla said, my daughter, I was then a professor of political science in several universities in Manila, primarily at Lyceum, the Philippines, and also the Far Eastern University. And occasionally I would be invited to lecture at San Beda, Lasal, and the other universities. Political science, because I was a graduate of UCLA and took my master's in international relations at USC. But at that time, the political situation, even the social conditions in Manila was so volatile, and there was distress that you can see around, not only in Manila but in the provinces. And my daughter and my wife, I was concerned because being a professor, I had to encourage debate in my classes, pro and con, about the political situation. So I would speak sometimes against the government, and sometimes I would encourage students who would express opinions in favor of Marcos. Now, because of the tense situation that was building up in Manila, as student demonstrations were going on, deaths occurred on the streets leading to Malacanang Palace, and I had to transfer my daughter and my wife from one house to another. Yeah, and as was mentioned by both speakers, there were groups that were against Marcos, and because I was speaking, as a professor, some students, the agitators and demonstrators, thought that I might be pro-Marcos, although I was neutral. So I had to transfer my wife and my daughter. She was then small, from one house to another, just to make sure that if anything happens to me, they will be safe. Yes, there was one time when I received a phone call. The phone call says, "You think you are safe? You think your daughter and your wife are safe?" I didn't know what to say because that was from a stranger. And well, the situation was so uncertain that even someone like me, I was teaching already in the universities, I didn't feel safe. Safe from people who might think I am pro Marcos, and also whether I would be subjected to government interrogation. My name was included in the blacklist I have discovered later. But then I heard also from my university superiors that for me to just tone down my lectures, just to stay quiet. And so my name was included in the blacklist, I understand. And I knew, because many of the students leading the demonstrations on the streets of Manila were my students. They came from my class. That's why, well, I shared this with you for you to have a sense of how it was during that time.
My father was teaching about how martial law, what martial law looked like, because he was teaching political science. And here he was teaching the truth about what martial law looks like, because there were signs all over the place. So my father took the foreign exam because being on the watch list meant you couldn't leave the country. And so he took the foreign exam and was one of the 15 who passed out of originally 1,000 applicants.
Yes, that's right. Just to summarize what you said, that yes, although my name was included in the watch list, when martial law was declared, and Marcos said that no one would leave the country without the permission of the government, which was something, it was as if we were all under arrest. So, I said, the only way to get out of the country was to join the foreign service. So I took examination out of more than 1,000 applicants. About 700 were allowed to be interviewed, and it broke. After the interview, there were only about 300 that were allowed to take the written test. I was one of the lucky ones. I was number 5.
Thank you, Papa.
So I joined down. I was able to get out.
Going back to Tita Myrla, what made it clear that you had to leave? Just to be able to hear, because you heard my father's story. What made it clear for him that he had to leave with me and my family was being on the watch list and having a way to be able to leave the country if needed.
It was one of those times when my youngest sister was playing with me. As I was preparing to accept an assignment in the countryside. It was a scary assignment, going to a faraway place where I didn't even know of wherein I might not be able to return. So my sister was playing with me, and I feared death and not being able to return. So I left without giving notice to my comrades, but returned for another assignment. It was easier to take and acceptable to take. So I just wanted to describe how much commitment we had to build to be able to remain in the movement. And that there were times when we were feeling the heat and, and the sadness of being separated from our families. But I didn't have to go to the US because I didn't have a way to go. But I left and kept coming back to the movement until I I got detained. And actually what I was telling my political officer was, I only want to get arrested. And my political officer said, what if you get arrested and you get killed? And it did happen that I had to face death during waterboarding when they kept asking for names of people who are working inside the military base. Fast forward, there was a big movement in the military base where they were able to stop the operation of the military base. So that was the kind of organizing that we were doing at that time. And they wanted to stop that. The US wanted to arrest who are working inside the base. So that was the biggest question in my torture. And there came a point when I said I had to stop and accept that I'm dying young. I won't see my nieces and nephews anymore. We will not be reunited with them because they were in the US at that time. And yeah, I just wanted to tell that story of we had to prepare ourselves at a certain moment in the waterboarding or in the torture that was being done, that we had to make a decision whether to tell names or not. And I chose not to because I thought that I won't be able to probably deal with myself anymore if I gave up one person who's going to be killed or incarcerated, or the whole movement falling down because of one indiscretion or telling one name. So I hope I think I indirectly answered the question, but I just wanted to say that it's been a life of selflessness and building commitment for a lot of us who have fought during the Marcos time. Yeah,
Thank you, Tita Myrla. And
the building of the selfless. Yeah.
thank you, Tita Myrla. Yes, many of us can't even imagine what you've gone through with the waterboarding and the sexual assault. And it's really, really sad to think that some of the people who were detained and kidnapped under the guise of immigration status are going through similar things. And again, that dissonance, and I feel like what yesterday's or today's sort of guilt for leaving and not being in the Philippines, most of it like keeping your family safe, keeping your children safe, are very natural and normal and understandable reasons to leave the Philippines. uh, and then you stayed behind. One thing I noticed, even with our colleague who has passed away, Tita Myrla, she and I used to work at Filipino Worker Center, and speaking of a time of being depressed after Baldonado Marcos was elected into office, that Victor mentioned, I remember Lola Yedo, who was also a political prisoner and suffered a health issue a few years ago, was talking about how she would never return to the Philippines because of that type of election. Just that deep sadness because of what our country has gone through. And again, like what Victor was saying, we sort of forget that our nation went through something that horrific. And in a way, even when we talk about it in the United States, there seems to be some disbelief that this is this horrific. Even this photo exhibit, this should be in a bigger space. This should be something that everyone takes seriously. This is sort of our Holocaust museum. This should be in a permanent space. But I'm glad that it's traveling, because this is 11,000, that's just the people that are recognized, 11,103. There's so much more, and one of the infographics in the back, next to the golden year signs, talks about all the statistics of how many people were tortured and how many estimate of how many people died. It's a very serious part of our history. And so I just appreciate the people that were able to join us today. One thing I also wanted to ask as part of our, as we start to wrap up, how did the Filipino American community and you fight the dictatorship from abroad in the U.S.? And how can the experience guide our struggle against fascism in the U.S. today? And if you want to add anything to that regarding, because what you guys went through is very serious, and it's, unless you are one of the people that were detained into El Salvador or Alligator, Alcatraz, a lot of us here are just kind of going as if life is normal. So there's that dissonance. But at the same time, when we try to compare what happened in what you guys had to do to survive, you had to go underground, and you were living in spaces where there was a lot of trust. If you go underground, you have to know who you trust. You have to know who has your back. You have to know who has enough resources to be able to accommodate you, like if they have their own family of their own. And I feel like, I don't know who here is in the activist circles or organizing community, but a question, part of what I'm wondering, of what the question I just asked of, how do you fight fascism, or how do you struggle against fascism in the US today? A natural question comes to mind. How do we test if we're even ready to do anything like what similar or anything close to what you did, going underground, going from house to house in safe houses?
I think I can start, and then Carol.
So you want
Oh,
to
wait,
know-
go ahead, Carol first. Go ahead, Carol first.
Oh, so you wanted to know how we would organize in today's climate, or how did we organize in the US during the Marcos years? And I'm just not sure what you...
Both, I think how you can respond to that is both historical and can also be a message to us today.
Okay. Going back to the 70s, just remember that was way before social media and the internet and all that. So how did we organize? We used the old-fashioned way of phone trees. I don't know if people know what the phone tree is. It's everybody makes a list of 10 people to call, and those 10 people have to call 10 other people to get information across. That's how we got information through to the community. But we also held regular demonstrations and rallies in front of the Philippine consulate. And the Philippine consulate in LA kept moving. And we kind of joked that they would move because they were afraid of us, and they wanted to lose us, but we kept finding them. They moved up and down Wilshire. But more often, we did educational work where we knew Filipinos congregated, like churches. Many of the activists, including myself, we were not particularly religious, but on Sundays we spent more time in churches than any devout Catholic that I know. We would be there with the 8 o'clock Mass until the end of the noon Mass, and we would be distributing flyers. We went to every Filipino stores every week to deliver newsletters, informing people about what's going on in the Philippines. We did Christmas caroling to raise money for political prisoners. And how are we fighting fascism today? Well, we learned lessons from the work in the 70s. Many of us are still here. We're still active in building communities, for building a more humane community. And many of us have recently participated in the No Kings rallies nationwide. In Los Angeles, in fact, there's a progressive Filipino-American group called RACA, led by a former Army veteran and a physical therapist / jazz singer. And Myrla and I have participated in the 2 No Kings rallies in LA. And what's nice about it is it's held in historic Filipino town. In the past, we joined rallies as part of the big crowd. And it's always in downtown Los Angeles. But this is the first time we've done something in historic Filipino town that challenges the Trump administration. And this is important because I think it was mentioned earlier that there are a lot of Filipinos that support the Trump administration. In fact, I was looking at the Pew demographics, and I think they found that 44% of Filipino American voters voted for Trump. That's almost half the number of Filipino American voters in the US. And so to be present in Filipino town and making that presence, showing that there is a viable opposition to the fascism that was growing is important. And that's, and that's why I think it's nice to go in a rally where you have a big crowd, but it's really important to do it where you're needed. And I think we're needed to make our presence in historic Filipino town. So we made the difference then, and I know we can make a difference today. I just also I forgot to say something earlier, but there were not only Filipinos were killed in the Philippines, there were 2 Filipino Americans, union organizers who were killed in the US, Silme Domingo and Jean Viernes. They were labor organizers from Seattle who were killed in the Union Hall on orders of Marcos. I think it's in 1980 or 81. So I forgot to mention that. So I just wanted to correct that. Thank you.
Myrla, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I wanted to add, I, I was amazingly surprised that we developed the resilience and the wisdom to lead in a new, very dark moment here in the US. And I could see that because, uh, we prepared well for the second Trump. The first Trump, we learned know your rights, taught people how to avoid arrest. And we didn't have an arrest for our members, but we worked on one case where the person has to submit himself to periodic check-ins and learn how to do deportation defense. One couple was almost deported, but they learned KYR and said that you taught us how to take care of ourselves. So that was Trump 1. But Trump 2, he came back with a clear plan for mass deportation. It was so cruel, especially during June. We were able to prepare before he came into power and became part of a rapid response network, where we even added on monitoring, being able to identify seafarers in cruise ships who were being deported and revoked of their visas. They're numbering to more than 150 now, and we're mounting a campaign for justice to them. So I think our experience in fighting the Marcos dictatorship has amazingly helped us through leading and preparing and meeting the threats of Trump too. It's definitely not new to us, though, that there's a difference in terms of technology and tactics. There's 3 more years to go, but the lessons of building people power and developing resistance, no matter how difficult it is, prevails with us who have been through the dictatorship. We at PwC just finished an action cycle where our base of caregiver volunteers gathered commitments through a pledge strike to set up a Kapwa community or a sanctuary community to protect each other from the Trump mass deportation machine. It's helping them not to self-deport, but to stay and claim their space in the US. So I think I look back to the experiences that we've had underground, above ground, and the lessons from this movement of immigrants that are resisting the Trump administration. And I have so much hope. I think I bring in a lot of hope, especially in the dark moments when it's like history is not going to change. We always say that, where dictators go, they fall. They all fall. There is no way. It's only a matter of how fast we can do that. And yeah, I think I'm in that mood and moment, and I owe it to the experience, the hardships of going through the Marcos dictatorship. They are lessons that are worthy of telling.
Thank you, Myrla. I also want to add, and I'd like to recognize as an answer to Myra's question, what we can do to organize ourselves is something that you're doing right now, right here, right now, listening to the story, learning from them, and then eventually sharing it to your community, sharing it to your folks. So what you're doing right now, and again, thank you so much for your time and your energy, is part of that continuance of history of resistance, that history of learning that Carl and Myrla is giving to us. We often say that we don't learn from history, and those who don't learn from history repeats it. It's really hard to learn from history because history is often a foreign country, something that we don't know. And what I observe is that we cannot even learn from current events. What more about learning from history?
So being able to learn what we have right now, right here in this moment. Not everybody can be an organizer. Not everybody can attend protests. It's great if you can. Not everybody can stand, for hours and hours. But it's the little things that we do within our immediate family, friends, community that matters. Whatever it is that allows you to create something, to recognize the humanity of everybody is already a contribution to that resistance. An artist by the name of Sherry Rabinowitz said something in the 1980s that we need to create on the same scale that society has the capacity to destroy. And there are so many ways of creating this moment right now as a community. I'm hoping that after this, these people here becomes a little bit more familiar with each other, share a little bit of stories with another. And there are so many ways that we can find, aside from attending a protest. We just learned, for example, that Gabriel Iglesias is going to have the stand-up comic, Fluffy, I don't know if you know of him, is going to have a performance here in San Antonio. And what they did is it's a free performance. But what you can do to get a free entrance is you bring 5 canned food, which will go into the food pantry because there will be food insecurity. You search for it, I don't know, I forget the venue, but 5 canned foods get you a free ticket. So things like that matters, that not only creates profit for corporations or profit for artists and performance, but create that sense of community and that sense of humanity and recognition of humanity are little ways that we can recognize that we only have one story. And that story is the story of those who are in power against those who are powerless. In whatever color, whatever economic, it's always a story of those who are in power against those who are powerless. And I think that's when we can recognize and start being together and having that force amongst ourselves. Myrla? You would ask, you have questions?
We're going to open the floor for any Q&A, if anyone wants to ask anything. And then after this, we'll show some clips of local San Antonio Filipinos actually reacting to People's Power, which was a movement that I think the social media started calling People's Power. I don't know if it came from within, but the People's Power that brought down Marcos. So if there's any Q&A questions for the panelists.
I hope you can hear me from here, but I wanted to ask, because both of you kind of spoke about going underground and the experience of having to protect yourself and the community, and that was, in the 70s and 80s, and now we're here with a lot of technological advancement and a lot of surveillance tactics being used against the community. What Victor was saying, more than 10 people couldn't gather in the streets. And now not only do you have eyewitness of, that, but you have cameras everywhere, monitoring people. And so I just wanted to ask if you had any advice from your experiences about how people today can protect themselves against, this higher and more intense level of surveillance that we're experiencing.
Did you all hear the question?
Yeah.
I honestly don't know. It's overwhelming to think about how there's a camera in every corner. I mean, there's a camera everywhere. There's ways that they can monitor every movement. In the 70s, when I was here in LA organizing against Marcos, the Philippine embassy or the consulate would send their photographers to attend our events, and then they would follow us. They found out where we worked. They would just At lunchtime, if I walked outside the building, they were there. They would follow us. And the feeling, uh, it's terrorism. That's the best way I can describe it. They wanted to instill terror in us. Every time we saw them, it just it strikes us. And today, at least you saw them. Today, you don't even see them. You can be monitored, you can be watched from above, from anywhere. There's always all these cameras and I don't even know what's available there. Even your own phone listens to you. So I don't know how to react other than just being always careful. And how do you become careful? I also can't answer that. It's just, it becomes built in if you had gone through the terror of having people follow you at work, at lunch, everywhere. But I couldn't give you any definitive answer at this point. I'm sorry.
Tita Myrla, you
I think I have an answer to that. We are part of the Los Angeles Rapid Response Network, and we're able to also track now what the government is doing by the hour, by the minute. And so I think one of the important things is to make sure that your sources are not the ones that that would give panic, that you will be able to discern which is danger and which is not danger, and that's being connected to a larger body of people who are monitoring the situation. Back then, during the height of the siege in LA, like sometime in June and August, we held together, being able to determine which we should believe and which one we should not believe. So panic is our greatest enemy, and I think it's also what the Trump administration wanted to get to even project that they're omniscient or they know where everyone is when it's not really the case. So we had to demystify that myth. And yeah, so there are protections also in terms of technology that have come about. Yeah, the organizations are using. So the more you get into the movement, the easier it is to navigate, which is really what you should be afraid of or not. There's a navigation where the movement tries to protect itself also by painting different narratives. Yeah. So
Thank you, Tita
so
Myrla.
we see hope all the time, not just discouragement. Yeah.
Thank you, Tita Myrla. Yeah, for the audience who don't know where Filipino Worker Center is, it is in Los Angeles where they experienced a lot of those horrific, they even use tear gas against crowds, just practicing free speech. And I think one thing important to learn from your stories is the narrative control and how, for example, I mentioned Jakub Ira earlier, who was detained by ICE for being a DACA. Admittedly, he was here legally. And You know, just because a president in power disagrees with previous laws, there are better ways to change it and amend it, and a process. And I think that's what the whole issue is the dismissal of due process. Anything related to immigration. And, but again, like I said, you boil it down, the immigration is just a title they use to be able to justify the detention and use it as part of their fear-mongering. But in essence, look at certain cases and they always have something in disagreement with the government. So one thing I wanted to ask is kind of going back to my question about the trust and you know, going underground, especially in this time of surveillance, the trust and the need to be private. I don't know if some of us here are looking at our movement spaces and sort of questioning, are we ready for something like that? To be able to have one another's back when in places like Texas, a lot of the movement spaces are very isolated from one another. And I just want to make sure that for people here, people that I know in movement spaces, they're not terrorists. And so, you know, just something to throw out there for anyone, those who are not really in movement spaces. But the trust issue is something that I'm wondering about personally. Are we ready to have one another's back when sometimes I observe people stopping the work and just canceling each other? And I don't know if you've heard the cancel culture is a thing in these generations, and versus restoration movement. So how does that affect things? If I can ask that, and then I just want to ask the audience again after you answer this question before we wrap up to close.
I think that will require another 4 hours of conversation. I really want to focus on the exhibit and what happened here, what we can learn. I know that there's a lot of parallelism. I'm not sure if we're there yet, but I want to go back to your question about safety and surveillance. I think it's just right now, for now, we just have to get used to checking on each other, right? So if you have friends you are concerned with, just make sure that you're checking them. That's what happened in the early years of the Marcos as well. People checking on each other, creating a network. No group chats back then, no social media. They have to do it a different way. But the underlying tone is check on each other often and what's going on, and making sure that you know about their welfare and their situation. It's easy right now, create a thread, chat thread with your friends you are concerned with, making sure that you know their whereabouts, you are concerned about them, and then creating that trust every day that you're checking on them for their welfare and not because you are a spy for someone else or an organization, or you just go sprout one day out of nowhere asking them, which becomes suspicious. So create that habit, create that culture of caring for each other.
Thank you, Victor. Very good points. Carol, Carol or Myrla, do you have anything you'd like to add before we close?
Yeah, I think, here in LA, they even came up with a Know Your Rights 2. So there is a Know Your Rights 1, what you're supposed to be doing when you encounter ICE. And also, so there's a higher form now that we're developing, so people would know how to protect themselves. I think along the lines of taking care of each other, monitoring and people getting connected, becoming part of organizations, checking on each other, and helping out when something happens, like when people are arrested and what to do and different protocols. So it's really great to be to be connected organizationally because that's our protection, to be united at this time and informed about what's happening. Yeah. The greatest antidote to this is organizing. We organize ourselves. And we organize ourselves not just to also defend ourselves, but also what's been happening right now is there are boycotts happening in terms of corporations that have been aiding ICE, helping out with mass deportation. So there are also actions that are happening to curtail the mass deportation designs of the administration. So there are boot camps, there are also offensive actions that are happening to stop and push back on the administration. These are all happening, and there is no other way to go but to be united and take part in those, rather than, keep this administration going and doing what it wants to do. As we have seen in history.
Thank you, Tita Myrla. I just want to, any last questions from the audience tonight?
I just want to close the conversation by reading a few lines from an essay that was included in a book called Mga Daso, The Stories of Martial Law in Bicol. Daso means torches or light. It's a collection of essays that was recently published in the Philippines by University of the Philippines. And one of them is a piece that I wrote as a part of my experience. I will start here in the last 4 paragraphs, or 5 paragraphs, and it's gonna be very fast. What the Marcos years did to us was not only to manufacture what we think, but condition how we should think. First, we were trained to conform to the routines of checking the cleanliness of the fingernails and the length of hair as students, as grade schoolers. Then we were told who was law-abiding and how to react when a public enemy is caught or killed by government agents. A popular saying in the Philippines goes, ang hindi lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makararating sa paroroonan. Those who do not look back where they came from will not be able to reach their destination. Time becomes distance. In the past is mile markers along the highway that informed us of our life's direction and velocity. But the English writer George Orwell also warned us that he who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past. But what if the past was manufactured to begin with? A curation of spectacles and pageantries and distractions by those in power. What if the past was believing curfews and banning of public gathering by more than 10 people were for public safety and not for controlling the movements of the communities? What if the past was being told to feel safe because the military jailed or killed subversives, instead of the fact that the Marcos government imprisoned, tortured, and disappeared citizens without due process of law? I like to propose a different way of looking at the past by invoking the Aymaras, an indigenous people from Bolivia. The Aymaras believe that the past is in front of us and the future is behind us. The past is in front because it was something we have already seen and known and experienced. The future is behind because it remains unseen. In that sense, all of us walk backwards into the future, our eyes fixed on the horizon of society. I believe personally that the past changes every day. Even now, as you are listening to these words, this lived present is already slipping into the past. Tomorrow and the following week, in weeks and months and years, this moment will slip further and farther back from our sight into memory. How will you remember this moment? What will you be nostalgic about in this new regime, this new administration, this person that came back to power? Will you celebrate his return to power, or a renewed energy to resist the revisions that they're doing to our history? Thank you very much again for your time. I hope you learned something. Tell your friends. This exhibit will be here until December 2, and is open for viewing with the contact information that Myra and Sarah Joy can give you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol and Tita Myrla.
Thank you, Sarah.
If you'd like to join us for the somatic movement happening in a few minutes, you can take this time to take a